Five Nights at Freddy's as a series is one of many games. From the OG Scott era games, to the VR games, to the Stillwell games, to 5 Laps at Freddy's, this game series has it all. And if you were to ask most people what they thought the best FNAF game is, they would probably say FNAF 4, maybe Help Wanted 2, and some crazy people would say Security Breach. However, you might be wondering what I think the best FNAF game is. I have made videos in the past talking about some of my least favourite in the series, and I don't want my channel to be all negative. So I thought I would shine some light on what FNAF game I not only think is the best, but isn't even close compared to the rest of the series. And I of course am talking about Into the Pit. Like, you saw the title, obviously that's the game I'm going to be talking about this video. Now, I know what you were thinking. Into the Pit? Really? Out of every single FNAF game, why this one? Does this game actually exist? Well, in this video, I'm not only going to answer why I think this is easily the best game, but why this is the most underrated FNAF game ever, with pretty much no one giving this game the credit it deserves. So grab your popcorn and drinks, this is going to be a long one, let's get into the video. Also, just a quick disclaimer before we start, yes, I'm aware of the drama relating to Megacat Studio treating their employees like garbage and heavily underpaying them, and I will not be discussing that in this video as I want to separate the art from the artist and don't want to bring up any more drama than needed. But for those who care, yes, I think it's absolutely terrible. But anyways, let's get into the review of the greatest FNAF game ever. So let's start from the top with Into the Pit's release and basic story. Into the Pit was released on the 10th year anniversary of FNAF 1 on the 8th of August 2024, to a widely positive reception with many people and content creators praising the game. Only people who didn't really want FNAF to continue as a series didn't like the game. But as to why this game did not do that well or stay relevant for very long, we will get into that later. Into the Pit was made by Megacat Studios, and the game itself was based off the book of the same name. And this game largely focuses on the story aspect and is, from what I can tell, pretty much a one-to-one of the original book, with a few tweaks here and there to structure it into an actual game and just instead of having Oswald be mad at Pit Trap for 5 hours. But speaking of the story, we should probably explain what the actual story of the game is for those who refuse to play the game, but to be honest, this game is pretty simple and easy to understand. For once. The game follows Oswald, a child who has a father. I know, very foreign concept. After getting bored after being at Jeff's Diner, a pizza place he has spent nearly the entire summer at due to his father not being able to afford a babysitter or something, he finds a hidden ball pit at the back of the diner. After deciding to climb inside and risk getting pink eye for some ungodly reason, I guess boredom is a strong motivator, he ends up in the past at the one, the only, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. While in the past exploring, Oswald encounters the Yellow Rabbit or Pit Trap or Ball Trap. Anyways, after playing some games with some newly encountered friends, you end up hiding inside a Golden Freddy suit while playing hide and seek, where you encounter Pit Trap, or as I will call him for the rest of this video. You hide from him and discover he's killing kids. Where have I seen that before? You escape to the present through the ball pit where your dad is waiting. Then, all of a sudden, Pit Trap attacks your dad and possesses him, with the rest of the game being you navigating the past and the present using the ball pit in order to complete puzzles and tasks to rescue your dad. All the while, you are being stalked and hunted by Pit Trap, both in the pizzeria and in your own home. So that's the basic story of Into the Pit. Pretty simple, but obviously story isn't everything, and we can talk about the story and my thoughts on it a bit later on. For now, I want to talk about the gameplay and how that feels, since in my opinion, that is the most important aspect of any game. So let's get into it. So FNAF games are obviously known for their gameplay, no shit. But in all seriousness, the original FNAF game blew up the way it did for two main reasons. Its interesting, complex, and uniquely told story, and the main thing we'll be talking about here, the unique gameplay loop. The sit and survive aspect of the FNAF games might be the most genre-defining part of the entire series, barring maybe the introduction of mascot horror. However, this means that the gameplay loop of FNAF is now a large part of how a FNAF game is defined, in a lot of ways interpreted and reviewed by players. Seeing if the games that came after the original expanded on the concept and made it more scary/fun, such as FNAF 4, or if they completely fucked it like they did in FNAF 2. Now, FNAF obviously has moved outside this gameplay loop a couple times, especially in recent years of Stillwell Studios taking over, with a few free roam titles, a couple of extra tycoon sections in some games, and more customization. Then there's FNAF World, but whatever, let's not get into that. I mean, FNAF World 2 would be peak though, please Scott, make it happen. Into the Pit, in my opinion, is a large departure from the original FNAF games in the series. It has a very unique gameplay structure and loop compared to the other games. And even though it has some similar aspects, such as the linear story focus, which Sister Location had some part in, or like the hiding mechanic taken from FNAF 2, Into the Pit takes these themes and expands on them in a really compelling way. For starters, let's talk about the actual quest aspect of the games. This game follows the standard mission-based gameplay where you have to complete certain checkpoints in order to progress. Now, this inherently isn't a good or bad thing, it's just the kind of game it is. However, what I love about this game is how creative you have to be in order to actually figure out how to progress. And this is done primarily through the act of going back and forth between the pit world and the real world. The puzzle solving in this game is extremely fun and you have to get really creative in order to progress. A simple example I can mention is the act of having to escape the house each night. Once Pit Trap takes over Dad's body, every single night starts with you being trapped in the house and needing to escape to make it to Freddy's. There are multiple ways that you can escape, 4 to be exact. And once you have escaped one way, you cannot escape that way again. So if you say walk out the front door during one night, the door will be locked and you can never escape through there again. There are some really creative ways that you can escape the house, such as grabbing a ladder from the attic and bringing it to the basement in order to escape through the window. These are some really fun and interactive puzzles that aren't super difficult but reward the player for exploring both in the house and outside the house as well. In terms of navigating the various locations, both individually and as a collective group, Into the Pit does a great job with its map system in helping the players navigate the area. Sure, there are some secrets that you need to use some brain power to find, and obviously the game doesn't exactly tell you the exact way you need to go sometimes. However, the game does a pretty decent job at outlining solutions for the player while allowing enough room for the player to figure out tasks and solve puzzles on their own. For example, on night 2, you need to help a kid get out of a trapped endoskeleton. However, in order to accomplish that, you need to find an item like a screwdriver in order to wedge the kid out. After looking around, a logical place to find one would be the backstage. However, the door from the backstage is locked, so you have to go to the present to find a key for the door, which is found on Jeff nonetheless, where you gotta complete some more tasks, find some more items and explore some more, then make your way back to the past to find the screwdriver. This isn't something the game yells at you to figure out, and you gotta use your brain a little bit in order to find the right item in the right location. The item collection is a big part of the game, in both the main game for completing tasks and for 100% completion of the entire game. The main good endings of the game require you to locate multiple items relating to Oswald's personal experience as well as a few Easter eggs. But in terms of endings, I'm not going to talk about them too much as I don't want to completely spoil the game. Obviously I get this is a spoiler included review and the game has been out for a while, but on a side tangent, I don't like reviews that outright tell me everything about the game from start to finish, since then there's no incentive to play the game because I already know everything I saw from this review online. So, anyways, I'm getting off topic. I'm just explaining my thoughts here. Getting back to the gameplay, I love the interaction between Pit Bonnie and the player. This game is very similar to FNAF 3 in the instance that Pit Bonnie is the only animatronic that can actually kill the player. However, there are some other characters that can hinder your progress, that being Freddy, Bonnie, and Chica. But first, let's talk about Pit Bonnie as he is by far the most interesting. Pit Bonnie is actually quite similar to Springtrap in FNAF 3 with how a lot of his mechanics are based off sound. If you are too loud, he will get notified to your location and you will either need to run or hide. There are certain spots around the locations that you can use to intentionally make noise to lure Pit Trap as well, which is great if Pit Trap is blocking your path or hindering your progress. The main part of his mechanic, of course, the hide and seek mechanic, which was introduced at the start of the game. Depending on how far away you are from Pit Bonnie when entering a hiding place, you will be forced into a mini-game based on your hiding location, that you need to perform some kind of action in order to stay alive and hidden from Pit Trap. An obvious example is the Golden Freddy suit where you need to hold your breath when he turns and looks at the suit. But there are also mini-games like when you're hiding in the vent and you need to wipe away the spiders. On top of these, if Pit Trap sees you entering a hiding spot, he can just straight up kill you, so you gotta be careful. But the flashlight can also be handy in some spots, as you can actually blind Pit Trap if you have a battery in your flashlight, which both encourages exploration to find batteries and a limited resource that you should only use when absolutely necessary, because once they're gone, they're gone. I find Pit Trap to be super fun to play around, and the various minigames and moments with the character really make him feel like a supernatural threat that's watching your every move. However, when in the pizzeria, you are also joined by none other than the 3 main animatronics, who all have unique mechanics which force you to play differently as well as spike up the difficulty for each night. For why Foxy isn't here? I don't fucking know. Starting with Chica. Chica will run around the building and if she sees the player, will make a loud alarm sound which will instantly tell Pit Bonnie where you are. So you have to book it or hide. These moments of Chica are super tense and she is by far the most annoying during normal gameplay. Next we have Freddy himself, and he's quite simple. Freddy will at times block certain doorways, which can cause you to get caught out in the open. However, he's quite rare and you can avoid him easily and adjust your strategy on the fly, so you just gotta be careful. Last but not least, we have Bonnie. He was probably the most threatening of the main three, as he's the only one that can actually kill you. Well, in a cutscene at least. Otherwise, he hides under the various party tables scattered around the buildings, and if you get too close, he will grab you and pin you in place, requiring you to perform a quick time action in order to get free. And like the other two, this doesn't do much but hinder your progress, or potentially rob you of a hiding spot, or get caught in the open, but all three of these animatronics are fine additions, though truth be told, I wish we could have seen more of these animatronics, but I will talk on that later in the video where I go over the few negatives I have about the game. Something I thought I should mention at this point in the video is the various difficulty options and the various settings which can affect how you choose to play the game. You can make the animatronics more aggressive, remove hiding spots, all the works, and to be completely honest, beating this game on its hardest difficulty, which is literally a hardcore mode, is super difficult. And I'll be honest in saying that I think the challenge aspect gives this game a lot of replayability, even if it's not all that much. The fact that a mode where dying sets you back to the beginning exists is a really cool added bonus to the whole custom night aspect, where instead you get a custom game experience, which I think is really cool. On the night thing too, this game does follow a 5-night structure, which I think is a pretty cool idea and actually makes the game 5 Nights at Freddy's, which is something I know Security Reach really lacked. In fact, I do have some ideas for a potential Security Reach having 5 nights, so if you want to see a video on that, let me know in the comments below. And at this point, I might as well follow in that good old subscribe plug. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe and like and hype the video on mobile. You know all that. I want to try and get to 150,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and if you can help make that happen, that would mean the world to me. But let's get back into the video. Now, the map and the buildings themselves are very interactive, and the way Oswald navigates the map and how the map over time opens up to the player with multiple creative paths for the player to explore is really well executed. For such a small building, quote unquote, I think the building is perfect, and honestly, probably one of the best locations in the FNAF series, period. I know this is just a minor point of discussion for the video and doesn't really affect the game all too much, but I really like the design of the building in Into the Pit, and the way it interacts with the gameplay is just super cool. Plus, it's the most realistic building in the franchise in my opinion. Just a minor thing to talk about, of course, but it is awesome. Now, with that, I don't have all that much to talk about other than the gameplay, besides of course the various mini-games that you can play in the arcade sections, which you can use to get tokens, which is part of the 100% nature of the game. This part of the game is completely optional, but all the minigames are super fun, and especially all the secret lore minigames, which will entertain any theorist if you're willing to look for them. As well as the nature of exploration, allowing you to find different items which can unlock new paths, endings, and Easter eggs. On top of all of that, there is a wide selection of minigame variety, so anyone can find that one minigame that they like at the very least. There's a surprising amount of playtime to be had exploring the various areas and trying to unlock everything, and I think it's great. Now obviously, like any FNAF game, the gameplay isn't all there is to it. Something that also set FNAF apart was its impeccable sound design, which is a big reason why the original FNAF game did so well, and why it is so well loved and talked about to this game. So in comparison, how does Into the Pit follow? Well, let's discuss that. Like every FNAF game, if you couldn't tell, the sound design is pretty fantastic. In terms of being a horror game, this game's sound design might actually capture that feeling better than the original game. Every single sound in this game, even the ones that are simple like doors opening and closing, footsteps, simple ambience, static, it is all actually very unsettling and just outright creepy. The creaking and closing of doors is just so unnerving for some reason, and it really just hits a weird part of my brain. Of course, there are sounds that are meant to be scary, such as the jump scares, stingers, and more unsettling sounds like people screaming, kids crying, and even some of the arcades glitching and the animatronic noises. The actual ambience of the multiple locations are all spectacular and really put the player on edge. The game has a theme of isolation with its ambience, where you really feel alone a lot of the time. But all the times you are alone, you feel like you're being watched. There's a massive contrast in the atmosphere from, say, the hallway of Jeff's diner to the ball pit. And then there's the contrast of the main world to the Freddy world. There's just this unnerving feeling, and I absolutely love it. The main world just feels so isolating but uncomfortable, while the Freddy world has the feeling of being watched constantly and the feeling that something horrible has happened. Not to mention when the power goes out in the Freddy world, that's just fucking creepy. This game seriously has some of the best ambience in any FNAF game if you're willing to get immersed in it. Only FNAF 4 and FNAF 1 have a chance to rival it in my personal opinion. But when it comes to sound design, by far the best example is Pit Bonnie and everything surrounding the character. Pit Bonnie's breathing is very unsettling, with his metallic yet gasping breath. sounding like someone who was just dying inside, drawing out for one final breath, which is interesting considering that this isn't the version of the character that's actually a person inside. I mean, I don't know, I've never read the book. But on top of his breathing, his voice with the laughing and giggling and screaming are all amazing, and really make you feel like you are dealing with something that is not of this world. All these sounds really add to the character, especially with the more intimate moments where you are, say, trapped inside a closet and he's looking for you. The sounds can also be heard from a distance when he's nearby, and it's super unsettling and creates a lot of tension. Now obviously the sound design is pretty good, and honestly impeccable. However, in my opinion, the sound design in this game is incredibly carried by its impeccable music. And I think, to be honest, the music in this game is so much more interesting to talk about, so without further ado, let's get into what is honestly, in my opinion, the best soundtrack in the entire FNAF series. So like I just said, I think this game's soundtrack is the best in the entire series. And when I say best, I don't mean most iconic. Games like FNAF World, Pizzeria Simulator, and Security Breach have much more iconic soundtracks and probably have some more bangers than Into the Pit does. However, I would actually argue that Into the Pit's soundtrack best suits its own game. Taking a game like Security Breach for example, I would actually argue that in the massive empty spaces the building has, Into the Pit plays off its isolation feel a lot better, and sure, Security Breach isn't meant to be the most isolating game in the world. However, the creepy vibe that Security Breach's soundtrack tries to play off with its ambience and lobby tracks just feel out of place. Tracks like the main theme and daycare fit quite well into the bright and colourful vibe with Pizzaplex, but obviously in terms of being a quote-unquote horror game, Security Breach's best tracks are definitely the ones that are not related to the horror vibe, which definitely drags the game down. The closest track I could possibly find would probably be the track Caught in a Loop from the second Princess Quest minigame, which is one of my personal favourite tracks in Five Nights at Freddy's, and arguably the best track in Security Breach period. However, we're not here to talk about Security Breach, we're here to talk about Into the Pit. However, the reason I bring so much attention to Security Breach is to highlight how much better Into the Pit is at establishing its tone and atmosphere. And in fact, a great example of what I'm talking about comes from the very first tracks we hear from each game. The title track or menu music is probably the most important piece of music in any game, as it's the first introduction to the atmosphere and vibe of the game it's trying to play off. If the music is fun and happy, you are likely going to be going into a fun and exciting upbeat experience. However, if the music is dark and creepy, you may be in for a lot of scares. FNAF 1's title music is a great example of what I'm talking about, setting up the tone for the game from the very beginning. And especially considering it's literally one of the 2 musical soundtracks in the entire game, it does a great job introducing you to the vibes of the game. Now, years later we get to Security Breach, and in my opinion, the title track of Security Breach is honestly one of the weakest tracks in FNAF history and is without a doubt the single worst title screen music of any of the FNAF games. It's a creepy music box rendition of the main theme, and it just does not fit with the game's themes at all, and it's the only track of its type in the entire game. However, in contrast, Into the Pit's title screen music might be one of the best. It isn't much, but a creepy distorted droning with random almost heartbeat-like moaning sounds, with the slightest semblance of music. Almost like a creature in the dark is haunting you from a dark space and watching you. Very similar to the game itself, huh? It's very unnerving and quiet, and instantly sets the tone of the entire game, and invests you into the creepy vibe that the game is built off. And the game built off this super well. There's an alternative version of this that's more arcadey and epic in comparison, and while I easily prefer the main one, this one still does fit the vibe of the game, which is what a title screen should try to convey, since it's literally setting you up for the rest of the game through the music. Now, the music in this game is very good at setting up environments and the threat levels within the environments, using the music to prepare the player for the possibility of danger. A good example is the diner theme from Chef's Pizza, which is this distorted music that sounds like some jazzy blues based off Toreador March, which is then contrasted to the ambience from the ball pit room, with this droning similar to the title screen. In fact, a lot of Into the Pit's musical genius comes from the moments where there are no musical tracks or where the music tracks are really quiet. Silence can be a powerful tool for horror when used well, and I'll touch more of that later on in the horror section. But for what it's worth, this game is excellent at using silence in contrast with its music to build tension within the gameplay. Now, onto some more fun and upbeat tracks, or the bangers as people will call, Holo Dance, which is the music from when you first enter Freddy's. This track is very fun and helps with the vibe of a children's pizzeria or of a party, as well as the arcades music where you can play skee ball, which is also an absolute banger. Now, going back to the silent aspect and how this builds tension, this music completely shuts off once you enter the Golden Freddy room. This immediately sets off alarm bells in the player, which when combined with the visuals, give the player reason to worry, which is obviously a good thing for horror games. Now, on the topic of music from arcade games, the tone and vibes of the tracks are, in my opinion, just as unsettling and creepy as the rest of the game, but has that 80s arcade vibe which I absolutely love. It's kind of like a mixture of upbeat nature, but also this like dark and creepy undertone, especially with the art style of the game, which is something I will definitely talk about in a minute. The arcade itself has a pleasant theme, but all the arcade minigames have really upbeat yet somewhat unsettling tunes, which again is the theme of the entire game. The appearance of Innocent with the unsettling feeling of something being wrong, which, of course, something is wrong. The whole game, from the ending to the various dialogue scenes, to the cutscenes, it's all super effective and really helps with the horror. However, there's one piece of music that really shows just how effective this game's music actually is, and that is Pit Bonnie's chase music. Pit Bonnie's chase, entitled Endless Terror, is this driving rhythmic drone with these high-pitched swinging melodies that sound like children screaming, while this rhythmic beat mimics a heartbeat. Sound like the music is coming from Oswald's own heart as he screams in terror. It's a very sudden shift, but it's so effective, and the music gets me every time. The pace instantly changes when this music kicks in, as you know you are in danger, and you need to book it as soon as possible to the nearest location to hide, or you are absolutely cooked. The volume on it is also louder, so it's a bit of a mini jump scare as well. I think this fits super well, and honestly, I would have preferred this over the DBD Springtrap chase music. Or hear me out, make a Pit Bonnie skin with this chase music. I mean, I'm just saying behavior, I would buy that skin in a heartbeat. Anyways, Into the Pit soundtrack not only fits the game super well, but it's also just a banger soundtrack in my opinion. Although, in order to actually appreciate the music and vibe of the game, we gotta talk about the art design and the horror that comes with it. So, let's get into it. Into the Pit might be one of the most visually appealing games in the franchise, and on top of that, it has to be one of the most unique looking games I've seen in a while, especially for a FNAF game. The pixel art style might be one of the most fun styles to look at, and I think it fits the aesthetic of the game super well, and was a fantastic choice for this game. In fact, this art style was the whole reason I got invested into this game into the first place, so, you know, I love it so much. For a game that is set in a weird fusion of time travel and dimension hopping, even if it's not what the game is actually about, the part of that makes the art style fit so well has to be the plot itself, with its glitchy nature of Pit Bonnie taking over your dad's body almost in a virus kind of way, which fits with the 80s arcade style. Like, this feels like you were playing an 80s arcade game, which is just really, really fitting. On top of that, the animations and design of all the characters are pretty excellent, and each character expresses so much emotion and really allows you to connect with each character even though none of the characters actually speak. You can make your own voices and hear it all in your head. This is also contrasted with Pit Bonnie and the other animatronics who are obviously lifeless with great designs. Something about the way they move, especially Pit Bonnie, who is the star of the show of course, the various animations, angles, and of course jump scares really make the character feel alive. For a game like this to have such smooth and scary animatronics is extremely impressive, and I have to give massive props to the art team for such colourful, detailed, and immersive environments. Each environment, from the warm yet rundown feel of Jeff's Pizza, the inviting yet off feeling of your home, even during the day, the innocence and somewhat loneliness of school, considering Oswald has no friends, sorry buddy, the dark and vulnerable feel of the pizzeria, and even the vibrance and fun of the pizzeria when it's open at the start of the game. Each environment is incredible and really immerses you into the game. Like I said before, I think the design of the pizzeria really helps the immersion too, and the art style does a great job blending not just every room in the pizzeria to each other, but also the contrast between the main pizzeria and Jeff's Pizzeria, with the colour scheme affecting the tone, the dark blues of the pizzeria contrasting with the bright oranges and reds of Jeff's Pizza. Also, some of the visuals like the dead possum are horrifying, and I wish that we got more visuals like that. Obviously, if you overdo it, it won't be as fun or impactful, but it's just something I wish they tried to implement a little bit more, since these moments are quite impactful, especially with the creepy atmosphere and the themes of the story. Not that I want FNAF to be super gory or anything, just try and convey the ideas in creative and creepy ways, but I digress. Outside of locations, I believe the visuals and actual look of the game really add to the horror in my opinion. A great example is related to Pit Bonnie with the minigames where he's trying to find you inside the closet or the Golden Freddy suit, and you have to hold your breath. The visuals of him looking inside is terrifying, especially with the sound effects of him breathing. The way his eyes scan the inside feel like you're being hunted by a calculating, intelligent predator who is ready to rip you apart at a moment's notice. Outside of the visuals, however, Pit Bonnie is also just an absolutely terrifying creature, and honestly one of the best villains in the FNAF franchise, which I know, shocker. However, assuming this is not William Afton and just some weird-ass creature that's stalking Oswald or just pretending to be William or whatever, manifestation, I don't know, there's different theories, but I'm not going to go into that. I really love this character, and I think that they are a much better creature than the Mimic. And I am serious. To be fair, the Mimic as a character was boring as shit, and anything is better than them. Sorry, that's just the truth. However, I absolutely love the stalker nature of Pit Bonnie. Watching Oswald from the shadows with his creepy laugh is super unsettling. Of course, there's the visual of the dead kids, which is one of the more gruesome scenes in the FNAF franchise, and I absolutely love it. On the topic of gruesome images, Pit Bonnie's jump scares are all fantastic, and the various different versions depending on where you die are a nice touch, with the sharp teeth and creepy ass eyes really make it feel like a creature from another world, and considering FNAF is widely known for its jump scares, I think this game does a really great job. I would even go as far as to say I think this game really captures the nightmare vibe better than FNAF 4. I'm not joking. Obviously that game has better jump scares, but I'm just gonna say it, I just think Pit Bonnie has more of a nightmare vibe. That's just my opinion. This game does a phenomenal job at building tension through its music and atmosphere, and with visuals providing a creepy environment to get immersed in, and overall, everything comes together with the super fun gameplay to make what I think is the best FNAF game in the franchise. And to be honest, this fact makes the next part of the video a little sad. So now, I gotta go over a question that I've had since falling in love with this game for so long. And that question is... Now, I've explained why I think this game is a masterpiece, and is easily the best FNAF game without question in my eyes, but I know for a fact a large number of you guys just don't see it that way. I recently ran a forum that got over 100 responses, probably more now, and asked you guys what you think the best FNAF game is, and to the anger of Ashful Spiff, FNAF 4 was easily number 1 on this list, with Pizzeria Simulator, a game that I think has a number of problems, being number 2, and third place being a tie between FNAF 1 and FNAF 3. Two games that I know people have problems with, mainly FNAF 3 with it being quote unquote boring. And while I don't necessarily blame people for liking this game, hell, FNAF 3 is my favourite of the original Scott era FNAF games, it's hard for me to look at these numbers knowing Into the Pit is right there. Hell, only one person actually said they liked Into the Pit, and even then, they still mention how FNAF 1 is the best quote-unquote mainline game, which I think explains a lot. Into the Pit is seen as a spin-off game from the franchise, and much of that is because the story itself is not really tied into the main lore from the Scott and Stillwell games. It's in its own category with its own lore, its own story, and it's tied to arguably the least popular FNAF media, which is the books. And while I was hesitant to play this game originally because of that, I still gave the game a shot, mainly because of the visual style. However, I imagine that most people didn't. In fact, something that I think a lot of people forget is that most FNAF games don't actually play the FNAF games. In fact, I ran a poll recently that got over 115 responses, and from the results, it's pretty clear how little people actually play the FNAF games themselves. The top 3 FNAF games that people have played were Ultimate Custom at number 3, FNAF 2 at number 2, and unsurprisingly, FNAF 1 at number 1. Into the Pit sits as the 4th least played FNAF game, with only Secret of the Mimic, Help Wanted 2, and Ruin being lower than it, although it was literally only ahead by like 3 people. Granted, this data was also with my content creator friends taking it as well, so maybe it's a little bit biased in that regard, maybe less people have actually played them, but the results speak for themselves. On top of that, I asked the participants whether or not they prefer to watch YouTubers play the games first and then play the games themselves, or, you know, like all these different ideas. And of those people, nearly 75% of the participants watch YouTubers over playing the games themselves, with 48% of those people deciding to play a game after actually watching the people play the game, which, if I had to guess based on the results, are the top 3. Into the Pit was really only played by die-hard fans. I mean, remember that Into the Pit has had less people play it than all the Freddy and Space games, 5 Laps at Freddy's, and the fucking FNAF movie game. But why is this? Well, I think I have a few reasons as to why. I mean, like I said before, I think just being a book game or a game based off a book immediately turned off some people to the game. Like I'm sure the Mimic game to those who, you know, didn't like the Mimic like myself. The second reason is that a lot of FNAF purists will tell you that Into the Pit with its own story just doesn't connect to the larger FNAF lore, so where's the theory crafting? We can't connect it to FNAF 1, it's just its own thing. Which I gotta say, just because you can't connect it back to FNAF 1 doesn't make it bad, although if I go into my thoughts on FNAF theories and how the FNAF story actually is, I'll be here all day tearing at a fucking new one, so let's move on. But I think the other 2 reasons why this game didn't do so well has to do with an issue that a lot of people have been calling FNAF out for recently. It's terrible marketing. Into the Pit released on the 10-year anniversary of FNAF 1, which seems like a really good day to release a game, except on how much other stuff they also released around that time. They released 5 Laps at Freddy's literally the day before, but actually 12 hours before, Pop Goes, and the demo for the highly anticipated Joy of Creation remake, which I gotta say, God, I'm excited for that. However, in comparison, Into the Pit kinda just got forgotten in the rough. Not to mention that the added bonus of it being 20 USD, which is like the only game that actually cost money, besides Pop Go for some fucking reason, but I don't know. I don't know why people like Pop Go so much, it's actually kind of mid. Anyways, $20 seems to be a price that a lot of people have a problem with a lot of people, including myself, at launch, thought the game should be $15 at least, which would contribute to the lack of interest playing. Now, despite that, and of course, despite my previous opinion at the time, that's changed, and I can say with full confidence, this game is 100% worthy of the price tag. It's easily a $20 game. The problem is, why pay $20 for a game when the Joy of Creation is right there? 5 Nights at Freddy's and all the other free stuff. Into the Pit is a bit more of a story game, so watching someone play it might be more interesting to a lot of people. Not to say that those are the only reasons, as maybe there's just some other things that just didn't gel with people, but I think we can get a pretty clear picture as to why this game didn't do too well. This game had a lot of things that brought it down, from the marketing to the wider game's audience to just the price tag, which is a real shame because this game is just incredible. But in saying that, before I give my final review of the game, I should go into the negatives of the game, because this game does have a couple things holding it back from being an absolute masterpiece, and I want to touch on them before getting to the final review. So let's get into them. This section will honestly be pretty brief, as I don't have too many complaints about the game itself. However, I do have some minor nitpicks as well as some more praise. Yes, I know it's a negative section, but let me be. Now, if you know me, you know that I'm not a lore guy, and I've never been a big fan of the story in the FNAF games. And yes, I'm going to complain about the fucking story. Okay, not in the way you think. I actually really like the story of Into the Pit, and I think it might be my personal favourite, with even some theories of mine that enhance the story a little for me. Mainly that the 5 kids that we rescue throughout the game are the 5 missing children that were killed at the start of the game, and we are just setting them free. It's a theory, but whatever, I think it's cool, which is, again, part of the reason why FNAF is so cool. Making your own part of the story is what makes it good. But anyways, when it comes to the story, there's one aspect that I'm not a huge fan of. Besides the usual goofy FNAF stuff that Scott usually writes, because Scott just can't really write, and that is the importance of Oswald's dad. Now, throughout the game, we are meant to be trying to find Oswald's dad, who is meant to be trapped somewhere in the pizzeria, which, for starters, are we sure about that? Maybe I'm just really stupid, but I feel like the scene where Oswald drags his dad out of the pit would make you think, maybe my dad's just being possessed and I need to get the creature out of my dad, not my dad trapped in the pizzeria, but I don't know, that's not my actual complaint, that's just a little nitpick I have. My actual complaint is the fact that I think the importance of finding Oswald's dad is not given as much importance that I believe it should be, nor the actual possible explanations behind what Pit Bonnie is and what exactly happened to Oswald's dad. Throughout the story, we do various tasks that don't really invest you in the overall story. It just feels like MacGuffin tasks that don't really do anything. Like, are we really trying to find our dad? The task of finding our dad just kind of gets ignored until literally night 5, where he's just in a random room tied up. Okay. There's also the aspect of the dad not being able to afford to take Oswald anywhere but a pizza place, while I was having a mum who works, so I don't know. Maybe I'm just a little bit of a rich kid. I don't understand this part of the story, but whatever. At the end of the day, it's a tiny nitpick, but getting immersed into the story is a little bit difficult in my opinion, just because it's not that fleshed out. At the end of the day, it's a tiny nitpick, but getting immersed into the story is a bit difficult because of how convoluted and just weird it is, although I do still think it's the most fleshed out story out of all the games. The next nitpick I have is I think the animatronics in this game, mainly Freddy, Bonnie, and Chica, have really boring mechanics and are not that interesting. Chica is the only one I say has a fine mechanic and could be considered an active threat, but Bonnie only has one night, and even still he's not the main threat. I think having more fleshed out mechanics of these guys would have made them a lot more threatening, and of course, where is my goat Foxy? Now, my most apparent complaint in this game is Dylan. Fuck Dylan. This guy sucks so much, I hate him. No, I'm joking. My most apparent complaint in this game is the world exploration. In the game at the moment, it's pretty good. However, there are entire areas like the school and the library, which I bet you forgot was even a location in this game, which just don't get any use. I wish this game had more interesting moments and exploration options within the daytime sections of the game in order to flesh out the town and maybe add some more story sections that I said were missing before. But again, these are all nitpicks and nothing too serious, which don't really affect the game all that much. In fact, my last complaint is kind of a compliment. Into the Pit is a pretty replayable game with all of its various endings, its various locations and collectibles, as well as all the minigames. Now that being said, there are moments in this game that feel really sluggish on a repeat playthrough, such as Chica slowly walking out of the kitchen after being lured by the pizza, which takes forever. But these moments are few and far between, and in a game series like FNAF, having any replayability is insane, which brings a complaint on FNAF itself. A lot of people say that the FNAF games are really replayable, and that's just simply not true. All the FNAF games, besides Into the Pit, Security Breach, FNAF World, and Pizza Sim, don't really do all that much to encourage replayability, which I get since FNAF is meant to be a first-time experience game. However, there's a reason that Security Breach is the best-selling FNAF game of all time, and why FNAF World and Pizza Sim is rated so highly. But like I said before with the price tag, it'd be nice to see these games have a little bit more replay value. But anyways, that's all the negatives, and more so nitpicks I should say, of the game that I have. So without further ado, let's bring it all together with the final review. Into the Pit is an amazing step up in quality for the FNAF franchise in my opinion, and I would love to see more games like this one with its art design, music, sound design, and all in between. And sure, given the certain issues that MegaCat has had, maybe they aren't the ones that should be making this game, which sucks because there was some serious love put into this game. The FNAF games are honestly quite stale at the moment and are just not really that good or creative in my opinion. Definitely nostalgic, but not as good as other games similar to it. However, Into the Pit, in my humble opinion, completely blows every game out of the water in terms of horror, quality, and love. And this game re-sparked my enjoyment of the franchise quite a bit. And this all makes me believe that Into the Pit is easily the best FNAF game. If I had to give it a rating out of 10, honestly, 9 out of 10. Not perfect, but very close to it. But with that, thank you for listening to me rant about my favorite FNAF game for however long it's actually been. If you enjoyed, again, be sure to subscribe and let me know if you have any games that you would like me to talk about, any plot points, any topics. I would love to get back into the style of content. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you to all my beautiful channel members, and I'll see you in the next video.